A Wolfram Notebook palette is created by laying out the labels and buttons and other controls that will be in the palette and then calling the create palette function. For example, this gives a button that pastes a number into the selected notebook, and this puts that button in a palette. Here's a more complicated example. As in that first example, the process starts by setting up the contents of the palette. This particular input creates a tab view control for selecting between two grids of buttons. After that, the palette can be created as before using Create Palette. The window title option is included here just to make it easier to identify this particular palette. Usually most of the work of creating a palette is in laying out the things that will be in the palette, since after that the palette can be created by calling the Create Palette function, or palettes can also be created using the Generate Palette from Selection menu item under the Palettes menu. The palette itself is actually just a notebook with various option settings that cause it to look and behave like a palette. Two of those options are the window size and window frame elements options. This shows the window size and window frame elements options for this palette and the same options for the selected notebook. The selected notebook is an ordinary default notebook, so these are option settings typical of notebooks that are not palettes. For the palette, the window size all option is what causes the size of the palette window to shrink to fit the contents of the notebook. The other option is the window frame elements option, which for an ordinary notebook includes things like a zoom box and a resize area that specify controls that can be used to resize the window. This notebook, for example, can be resized by putting the mouse near the edge of the window and clicking and dragging to change the size of the window. The palette notebook doesn't have a zoom box or a resize area, so it can't be resized, at least not in that same way. The palette can, however, be resized by changing the options. This input sets the options for the palette notebook to include all of those resizing and other controls in the window frame, and after that the palette can be resized just like any other notebook. There are other options that are more critical to the functionality of a palette. One critical option is the Window Click Select option. This shows the values of the Window Click Select option for the palette and for this non-palette notebook. The Window Click Select option affects what happens when a notebook is clicked. The basic difference between clicking in a palette and clicking in other notebooks is that clicking in an ordinary notebook selects the notebook, but clicking on a button in a palette operates the button and does not select the button or the palette. To illustrate how the Window Click Select option works, here again is an ordinary paste button that can be clicked to paste things into the selected notebook. And since currently the selected notebook is this notebook, clicking the button pastes things into this notebook. If this button is copied to a different notebook, then if it isn't already selected, the first click on the button in that other notebook will select the other notebook, so that now it is the selected notebook, and a second click will paste something into that notebook rather than into the original notebook. For the button in that other notebook to behave as it would in a palette, it is necessary to be able to operate the button without selecting the notebook, and that's where the Window Click Select option comes in. This sets the Window Click Select option for that other notebook to false, and after that, clicking on the button in that other notebook operates the button rather than selecting the notebook, which pastes something into whatever notebook is selected, which is currently the original notebook. Another important option in palettes is the window floating option. A floating window is a window like a palette that remains visible on top of other windows even when the other windows are selected. This palette, for example, is visible even though the window behind it is the selected window. The value of the window floating option can be set to true or false, or for this palette the value is actually automatic, which here means that the window is floating if a different option, the window frame option, is set to palette. Setting the window frame option to palette changes the appearance of the frame around the window, but also for this palette window causes the window to float. Setting the window frame option to something else, or setting the window floating option to false, stops the palette window from floating so that the palette window is visible only when it's clicked. Setting the window floating option to false can be useful in situations where it's desirable for some reason to prevent a floating palette from blocking the full view of a selected window. A palette notebook can be selected after first changing the window click select option to true, but the window still can't be edited because palette windows by default have two other option settings, the editable option set to false and the deployed option set to true. For palettes, the effect of the deployed option overlaps with the effect of the editable option since either option can make the notebook uneditable. Setting the editable option to true and the deployed option to false makes the palette window editable just like an ordinary notebook, but then of course it no longer functions as a palette. The notebook is now a selectable, editable notebook, so clicking buttons just pastes things into this notebook. Returning to the original version of this palette can be installed as a menu item in the Palettes menu by choosing Install Palette at the bottom of this menu. The other items in this menu are palettes that have already been installed, the Generate Notebook from Palette menu item, which resets notebook options to turn a palette into an ordinary notebook, much as was done in the preceding example, and the Generate Palette from Selection menu item, which was mentioned earlier and which does much the same thing as the Create Palette function. Choosing Install Palette opens a dialog box, and the new palette is installed by choosing the new palette from the Source pop-up menu, entering a name for the file where the palette notebook will be stored, and clicking OK, which adds the new palette to the Palettes menu. After that, the palette can be opened at any time by choosing it from this menu. Installing the palette had the effect of saving the palette notebook file in one of several directories. The notebook for this new palette was saved within a directory specified by the value of the global variable user base directory. In normal usage, the location of that file is usually unimportant, but it can be important, for example, when uninstalling a palette, since uninstalling a palette requires deleting or at least moving that file. This input, for example, uninstalls the new palette by deleting the file that was added when the palette was installed. The palette will still appear in the Palettes menu, though, at least in this notebook session, because palettes are added to the Palettes menu at startup time. But quitting and starting a new notebook session would also remove the new palette from the Palettes menu. Most of the default options for palettes are set in the style sheet. Default palettes use a style sheet called Palette, which is a built-in style sheet in Wolfram notebook systems. Here is that style sheet showing all of the default option settings, including the editable option and the window frame elements option and the window click select option and so on. There are lots of options here that affect the appearance of a palette or detailed behaviors that can be relevant in specific situations. That's the end of the examples. Since palettes are just notebooks with various buttons and controls and option settings, much of the general documentation about buttons and controls and notebook options is also relevant to palettes. In addition to all of that, a good place to find more information specifically about palettes is this tech note on creating palettes.